Hello everyone, this is Austin, VE7QH, and today I'm going to run you through an introduction to DSTAR. This is a presentation that I provided to my club a couple of years ago, and I thought it might be useful for some people to just have a basic understanding of how the DSTAR network works. This is very surface level. There's a lot of networking sort of stuff you can get into with DSTAR, but this is just an introduction to help get you on the air. This isn't based around any type of radio, so you will have to take what you learned here and apply it to the DSTAR instructions for your specific radio. Yeah, so what is DSTAR? Well, it's the Digital Smart Technology for Amateur Radio. It was a digital protocol developed by the Japan Amateur Radio League, and it includes the standards for digital voice and digital data. DSTAR supports a comprehensive repeater system linked through the internet. So much like IRLP, you can either run the repeater, you can talk on a repeater on its own in your local area, or you can link that repeater to other repeaters and other reflectors to talk around the world. And we'll cover that later. Digital voice, which is has the acronym of DV. It's a lot like analog voice. DV allows you to operate on both simplex and on repeaters. So a big misconception behind DSTAR is that you can only use it with internet, and that's not the case. DSTAR radios are able to run on simplex, so I used to talk to my friends all the time on DSTAR simplex, no repeaters, no internet. It'll work with or without internet connection. For simplex, it's pretty easy and straightforward. You just go into the radio's menu, program your call sign, set your radio on your simplex frequency that you'd like, and set it to DV mode, and away you go. For repeaters, there's some basic knowledge in radio configuration that needs to be in place before you can transmit, which this presentation will cover. And I like to throw this in at the bottom down here, that while it seems daunting at first, operating on DSTAR is actually fairly simple. So you can see here just the basic overlay of what the system can look like. So you can do, say over here, digital voice into a repeater, which is then connected to the internet, which would then come out on another repeater. Satellite, you can take your location and it'll be injected with your signal as well. You can do internet access through your computer, which we won't cover here, or you can do simplex, however this is described here. I haven't really looked into that. DV repeaters, also known as DSTAR repeaters, digital repeaters. DV repeaters work very similarly to analog repeaters. So if your goal is just to talk with your friends on a local repeater, no internet involved, it's fairly simple. Where DSTAR gets complicated and like other digital modes is when you start connecting to the internet and doing linking. So the difference being that they can also be connected to a gateway. So up here, digital repeaters work very similarly to analog repeaters, the difference being that they can also be connected to a gateway. And the gateway will be connected to the internet, which will allow you to link to other repeaters or to reflectors. Or for other repeaters to link to your repeater and you'll hear them. It can work both ways. So radio configuration for DV repeaters. Like a normal repeater, you need to set the frequency of the repeater and the shift. So there won't be any tone encoding. There might be a digital code, but I haven't seen it ever. You set your frequency and the repeater shift, or your offset. Unlike a normal repeater, there are a couple other things you need to set up, such as RPT1, RPT2, URCALL, and MyCall. And I'll run you through what each of those means. So RPT1. RPT1 will be the call sign of the repeater and its module letter. RPT1 can be thought of as where you want your signal to go. So RPT1 is you're just telling your signal to talk to the to talk across the VE7 RCK C repeater, for example. So your repeater call sign followed by its module letter. On all radios, RPT1 has room for 8 characters to be entered, and it's very important that the module ID always goes in the 8th position. So if you're trying to connect to repeaters such as VE7AA, where it's only a 5-letter call sign, you still have to add the spaces so that the module ID goes in the 8th position. So all DV repeaters will have what's called a module ID attached to them. DSTAR has a standard for module IDs as follows. The 70 centimeter band repeaters will use the B module, and the 2 meter band uses the C module. So if we wanted to connect to the VE7 RCK 70 centimeter DV repeater, we would set RPT1 as VE7 RCK space B. And like I noted earlier, the module letter always needs to be in the 8th position. And you can see that example down here, VE7AA space C in the 8th position. When accessing a repeater, RPT2 can technically be left blank. This will make the repeater act as though it's an analog repeater, meaning only the people on the repeater will hear you. So RPT1, as long as RPT1 is set, RPT2 can be left blank. The only time you need RPT2 is to be accessing a gateway. So if you would like to access a repeater gateway, you'd enter the call sign of the repeater followed by a G in the 8th position. So G stands for gateway. So an example would be VE7 RCK space G. The usage of gateways will be covered later, so don't worry about it too much for now. So URCALL is where your commands are going to go. So this tells the repeater where your transmission is going to go. 99% of the time it'll be set to CQ, CQ, CQ. So that means you just want your transmission to go to anyone who hears it. URCALL is also where your linking and unlinking commands will go if you want to link to another repeater or reflector. And a note on that, linking to a repeater or reflector requires the gateway to be set in RPT2. So essentially how this is going to work is the repeater is going to ignore any commands or isn't going to send anything to the gateway unless RPT2 is set. So if your repeater is linked, for example, so someone from another city is linked to your repeater, if you don't have RPT2 set to the gateway, the person in the other city will not hear you, but anyone locally on this repeater will hear you. So that's important to note as well. So if you're driving around in your car, you've got a DSTAR mobile radio, and someone connects to the repeater and makes a CQ call and you want to talk to them, they won't hear you if RPT2 isn't set. And you can just keep RPT2 set all the time. You don't have to turn it off. Some people like to leave it off so that they aren't accessing the gateway. But if you don't mind, you can just leave it on and never have to worry about it. So that is your call. My call is just your call sign. So that's going to be VA7AHH, which this slideshow is written on my old call sign. VE7QH is my new one. On most radios, it is programmed in your settings, and once you set it, you shouldn't have to set it again. In the same menu, in most radios, I'm pretty sure in all of the new radios, you can choose a short message to be sent when you transmit. So on my radio, back when I lived there, it was Austin in Chilliwack, BC. So anytime I transmit, it shows up on the radio of whoever receives my transmission. So anytime I transmit on the other radio, they will see my call sign and the short message that I chose underneath it. So now we can put this all together. So If we want to access the VE7RCK repeater, how would we access, say, the 2 meter part of it? So you're going to set RPT1 is VE7RCKC, and the C is in the 8th position. I can't stress that enough. RPT2 would, in this situation, is blank. If you wanted, you could set it to VE7RCK space G, and it wouldn't affect anything. Your call is going to be CQ, 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 and my call is VA7AHH. And if I key up, now I should hear a beep from the repeater. And I don't have a DSTAR repeater near me to demonstrate this on anymore. But if you key up and say your call sign, you should see the repeater come back to you, much like a squelch tail on an analog repeater. And if you're ever unsure on how to set these, back in the day there was a handy tool on the DSTAR info website where you say what repeater you want to access, and it gives you all the settings for you. Now on to gateway operation. So when you're using a repeater's gateway, it'll still operate as a repeater. This means that anyone local on the repeater will hear you. And this is important to note, that if you're connecting to other repeaters and you're talking to your friend on the other side of the country, anyone local on the repeater to you and anyone local on the repeater in your friend's city will hear the conversation. It's not a private conversation. So using a gateway allows your repeater to connect to a reflector or another repeater. When your repeater is linked to another repeater, anything transmitted on the other repeater will also be transmitted on the local repeater. So if anyone in the other city wants to make a call on their repeater, you will hear it as well. So if your friend transmits over repeater B, it'll also be transmitted over repeater A when they are linked. And it is important that if you're operating a repeater that you are not the owner of, you need to get permission from the repeater owner or operator, such as the radio club that built it, prior to doing any linking. Some networks are set up in a way where they don't want people controlling the repeater. It's set up as is, and you're not supposed to be changing any of the... You're not supposed to be doing any linking or unlinking with it. So just make sure you're getting permission before doing any of this. So to connect to another repeater. So to connect to another repeater, you first need to make sure the local repeater is not in use. Next, you're going to make sure RPT2 has the gateway set up, if you didn't have it done already. And you're now going to configure your call to the repeater that you want to link to. So your call is the one that's normally CQ, 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 but in this case you're going to tell it to, you're going to set it for a linking command. And the linking command is similar no matter what call sign you put in there. So it follows this formula. So in this example we will link to the VE7RAG B module repeater. So in your call, you're going to set the call sign of the repeater that you want to link to, followed by the module with no space. And so this is the only spot where you're not going to put a space between the call sign and the module letter. And that is because in the 8th position you need to put in L. This is a linking command. So no matter what you're connecting to, the 8th position needs to be L, and that will be your linking command. This tells the network that you want to link. So if you want to access, for example, a reflector, we'll use 1 Charlie. It's going to be REF001 Charlie, or C, REF001CL, and that tells the network you want to connect to reflector 1 Charlie. Once you're connected to the other repeater, when you key up, say your call sign that you're linking to VE7RAG Bravo, or whatever it is you're linking to, the repeater should come back and say remote system linked. Once it is linked, set your call back to CQ, CQ, CQ. Now you can transmit and make contacts. If you don't change your call back to CQ, 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 it's going to tell the system that you want to link, and it's going to just come back and say that the system is already linked, and no one will hear you. When you're done making your contacts, you need to make sure you unlink the system. So unlinking is really simple. So U is your unlink command. So you've got L for linking and U for unlinking. So you're just going to put a U in the 8th position of URCALL. So you can see down here, space, 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 U. Transmit and say your call sign and unlinking. The repeater should come back and say remote system unlinked. And the repeater will now operate like it normally does, and that being only locally. It's important that after you send your unlinking command that you set your call back to CQ, 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 and that is because the next time you key up, the repeater will say there is no system linked, and that is because you're telling the system to unlink. We'll do a quick demonstration on digital data as well. If all you're wanting to do is do voice over DSTAR, you can stop here. But as an introduction to DSTAR, it's pretty cool to see the other things you can do. So digital data allows for data transmission over RF. Digital data makes it easy to send text messages and files over the air. And there are programs designed for this purpose. And an example of that is DRATS and the Icom phone app. Digital data, or DD, is primarily done over simplex, but can be done over repeaters as well. And please refrain from operating digital data over repeaters unless there is permission given by the owner or operator of that repeater. Just because when it comes through, it's going to tie up that repeater and no one else can use it for the length that you are transmitting data over it. And since there's no voice, it can confuse some people as to why the repeater's keyed up and it shows your call sign, but they're not hearing any audio. So it's best to do this over simplex, but it can be done over repeaters. DRATS is probably the most popular digital data mode for DSTAR. You can connect your radio to your computer and send text messages and files over RF to other radios that are connected to DRATS. This program can be used over the internet to connect to what is called a RAT flector, and these are messaging boards that use the same program. So you can do it locally over RF or do it over the internet into what's called the RAT flector. And you can see an example here. So this is like the chat menu, and you can see it'll list all the stations that the program has heard, and you can send messages back and forth. You can also send files, so you can see this is what the files that you have on your computer in what's called the DRATS shared folder. So they won't see everything on your computer, but anything in this file they will. And then you can access anything in their file and download it, or you can upload your file into their box over here. The Icom phone app was developed for use with Icom radios. But a note is I have made it work with my Kenwood as well. It didn't work very well, and this was 2 years ago, so it might not work anymore, or it might have gotten better. But the phone app connects to your radio through Bluetooth and allows you to send text messages and pictures over RF directly from your phone. And this presentation predates the 705 a bit, because now the 705 and I believe the 905 allows for sending pictures like natively on the radio. But you can, on the older radios, as long as you have the Bluetooth module in them, you can send pictures and text messages RF directly from your cell phone. The app also allows you to change your RPT1 and the URCALL settings from your phone instead of on the radio. And you can see this is what the app looked like back when I created this presentation. It may or may not look a little bit different now, but hey, I'm operating my ID5100. How's the weather? And then they send a picture of the weather. So it's pretty cool what it can do, and that's the presentation there. So, like I said, that's a bit of a overview of the DSTAR network. It's important to note that this isn't specific to all radios, and I glossed over a feature on most new radios now called DR, which is digital repeater, and that allows DR pretty much does all of this for you. And at some point, I will do a separate video covering DR. In fact, on the channel already, I did overview DR on the Kenwood D74. So that's going to be very similar to the Icom radios with a couple exceptions. But DR essentially does all of these commands for you. So DSTAR doesn't require you to enter all of these commands by hand. Um, but using DR, you can go in and say local call, which will set it to CQ, CQ, CQ. You can set it to use reflector, which will automatically set your gateway. And there will also be a menu for linking, so you just tell it where you want to link to and it will input the command for you. So DR makes it a lot easier. And I do plan on making a video about DR and how it essentially works on the Icom radios, because right now I've only covered it on the Kenwood. But thanks everyone for watching. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to leave a comment or reach out to me via my email that I have on QRZ. I've been operating DSTAR for about 7 years now, and I should be able to answer most basic questions for you. So let me know if anything comes up. And with that, I'll say 7-3. Have a good day, everyone.